Hey, hi everyone. My name's Owen. We're hosting the Conformity Assessment webinar today. We're just going to allow a couple of minutes for the attendees to filter through, and then we'll get started. I'm just going to give it about another 30 seconds. Okay, yeah, we'll get started. So welcome everyone to today's webinar. We appreciate you taking time out of your day to be here with us. In a moment, I'll be passing you over to my colleagues, Smridula and Joseph. But first, we just want to do a little bit of housekeeping. So please note, after the presentation has concluded, we will have a small amount of time to conduct a question and answer session. So please feel free to type any questions you have throughout today's presentation into the Q&A function within the Zoom platform. Following the session as a whole, a recording will be sent to all registrants in the coming days. And yeah, please use the chat or the Q&A throughout. So we'll get started. I'm going to pass you over to Smridula, and I'll join you for the Q&A in a little bit. Thank you. Smridula?
Thank you, Owen. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us in today's session for regarding the conformity assessment routes. I'd just like to start off by giving you a brief information about our company. So we have a headquarters in Chicago, and we have office locations across the globe. Our mission has always been to provide value-added services specifically to improve compliance, reduce costs, and increase efficiency and productivity. On the screen are a couple of high-profile clients that are currently within our portfolio here at Celegence. So like I mentioned earlier, we have our headquarters in USA, and we have offices around the globe. We have offices in the UK, Netherlands, Romania, China, and India. India is where we conduct the global delivery, and it has a center of excellence located in India. While we have a specific software development and global delivery from Romania, we have SME consulting in Japan, and we have onshore SME consulting in Brazil as well. We have been certified by the NMSDC as a minority business enterprise in 2022, which we are very proud of. Apart from that, we also have the ISO certification 9001 and 27001. We offer comprehensive coverage in terms of the services that we provide both for drugs and for devices. We have publishing related activities, regulatory submissions, regulatory consulting, compliance, and regulatory writing and labeling. There is a very competent team on board that can help with all aspects of what has been listed on the screen, both for drugs and devices, like I mentioned. With this, I'd like to pass it on to Joseph, who's going to go over the agenda and the rest of the slides.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much, Smridula, for passing it over. So over here, what we are going to basically look at, and basically I'll take you through the agenda for today's session. So we will be having a look at the, well, we've done the introduction to Celegence and the speakers. Or speakers will be following shortly. We'll give a brief introduction to the conformity assessment. We'll talk about the conformity assessment routes and the options that you have. and we'll go into a bit of details about the conformity assessment process, navigating a conformity assessment, and then coming to common pitfalls and challenges that partners are facing within the industry, and then we'll take a live Q&A session at the end. So stick around. Okay, a very quick introduction to the speakers. So myself and Smridula. Basically, my name is Joseph Richardson Larbi. I've got a master's degree in medical device regulatory affairs. I've been in the industry for over 2 decades, and mainly I specialize in the life cycle management of medical devices. So really end-to-end, from research development, going into certification, acquisitions, and then the post-market surveillance elements at the end. So really end-to-end stuff, ISO certificates, QMS certificates, the lot. Smridula, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Joseph. So I'm Smridula. I'm currently working as a senior manager here at Celegence. I have around 12 years of experience predominantly with medical devices and the PMS documentation for medical devices, as well as in vitro diagnostics. But I've also dabbled a little bit in clinical research and pharmacovigilance for devices and drugs.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, so going into conformity assessments, introduction to conformity assessments. Basically, I think the very first question that we find ourselves asking is, what is a conformity assessment? I'm sure the majority of us on the webinar or today's session do know what a conformity assessment is, but for the benefit of those that are new to the industry, we decided to put this slide in. What is a conformity assessment? So a conformity assessment is basically the examination of a manufacturer or a subcontractor who is affiliated with the manufacturer. Is an examination of their technical documentation or their quality management system, with the end goal to really acquire approval or the CE mark to market that particular medical device, IVD, within the European Union. So, you go into this with the aim that you will be approved to basically sell or distribute your device within the European Union. And this will apply to all 27 member states. So every class has its form of or a route to acquiring this particular CE mark. And when the CE mark is awarded, it comes along with the notified body that awarded the certifications. It comes along with their identification number. So when the notified body is approved by the EC, basically they are given a unique identifier, 4 digits that accompany the CE code. So if you look at your medical devices, right underneath the CE mark, you have a 4-digit code, which is a unique identifier to the notified body. In that case, if the device is within the supply chain on the market and anybody picks it up and they want to know more about it, they know who to reach out in terms of which notified body approved the device to be on the market. So that's a very brief introduction into what a conformity assessment is and what you'll be getting into, or what the end game is. So we'll go into the various classifications and then talk about the various routes that we do have for a conformity assessment. So over here, as I mentioned, the end goal is to really get a CE mark, and each classification of a device has its route to conformity. If we take the very bottom row, we've got lower risk devices, class A devices, mainly will be self-certified by the manufacturers. However, if that low risk device, a class A device or class 1 device, has got a sterile functionality to it, or a measuring or reusable side to it, really relating to medical devices, then that aspect will go through a notified body conformity assessment before the declaration of conformity is drawn up by the manufacturer. So manufacturers cannot draw up declaration of conformities unless you've assessed your technical documentation or quality management system, even for a class 1 device. It's only after you've conducted your assessment, either self-assessed or the sterile measuring or reusable element of your process or device is evaluated and assessed by a notified body. Only then can you draw up your declaration of conformity. For medium and high risk devices, a notified body involvement is required, and the notified body will be the one that will be recommending a CE mark to then be issued, or will issue you a CE mark. So another question is, I mean, we've spoken about who conducts a conformity assessment. Really, it is the notified bodies that will conduct the conformity assessment. But there is an involvement of how conformity assessments are conducted within the industry, and things have changed over time. From the directive era into now the regulation era. And let me just have a look at this. Okay. From the directive era into the regulation era, and we all know how the regulations have basically come about. The scandals that were relating to the breast implants, the metal hip implants, all of these things cause a lot of scrutiny within the industry, which is why we are moving away from the directive side of things into the regulation side of things. The directives was issued by the EC. Member states would then adopt, and you could add and subtract certain elements, not follow the entire directive. As it was a directive, whereas this case in the regulation, it is an act of law, and you have to follow everything as per the regulations. So for conformity assessments, how they've evolved from that era, one, we've all seen the impacts of, we've got fewer notified bodies within the industry at the moment. And this is as a result of all the notified bodies going through a new assessment under the regulations with the EC to be recertified under the regulations. And really, there's a lot of red tape around now what notified bodies have to do in order to conduct a conformity assessment. A good example is, the skills and the staff that the notified body must have on board. Gone are the days where they could have contracts with certain professionals or laboratories to conduct part of the conformity assessment. Now it's really specified on which type of staff within the notified body has to take on the initiation, the assessment, the review, and the approval and the recommendations. So these are key aspects of how the conformity assessment has evolved over time from the directive era into now the regulation era. Okay, so next we will have a look at the conformity assessment routes or options that are available to the different classes of medical devices, or to the different classes of IVDs that are or will be available on the market, or that the manufacturer is manufacturing. Okay. So over here, we do have for your class 1 medical devices, and this is, so we're starting off with the EU MDR side of things, and we'll come to the IVDR later. And there's a lot of detail that goes into it. The annexes are well interconnected. So under the EU MDR, Article 52 basically specifies which class of a medical device needs to go through which particular conformity assessment route, or which option you can use. So the Article 52 will specify this, and then the annexes, Annex 9 to 11, will then specify the actual detail that you have to go into, or what type of documentation you need to have in order to satisfy the obligations of that particular route or option. So for a class 1 device, so starting with the class 1 devices, we split this into two. We've got the self-certified element. So this will be a simple class 1 device, which is not measuring sterile or a reusable surgical instrument. In that case, manufacturers can self-certify the devices themselves, but that is, to self-certify means you're then going to draw up your declaration of conformity to demonstrate that you do have the specifics or requirements of the EU MDR for a class 1 medical device. And you can only do that after you've drawn up your technical documentation. So a technical documentation is required for all classes of devices. Draw up your technical documentation as per Annex 2 and Annex 3 of the EU MDR, and then you have your QMS in place, and then you can draw up your declaration of conformity as per Annex 4 of the EU MDR. So that is a simple class 1 medical device. And for your sterile devices, you then have two options. You can go through your Annex 9, Chapter 1, looking at your QMS certification, and then the second option is Annex 11, your Part A production side of things, where you are assessing the processes that the device then goes through. And that will then be limited to only the sterile, measuring, and reusable elements of things, where you would then need the involvement of a notified body. So the take here is for class 1 devices. If you are a simple class 1 device, where your device hasn't got any sterile functions or measuring or reusable, it's not a reusable surgical instrument, then you can self-certify straight away. If not, then you will need a notified body's involvement in that, and the notified body's involvement will be limited to just the sterile, measuring, and reusable element of your class 1 device. So that is that for a class 1 device, and a similar thing applies to an IVD class A device. Coming into your medium risk devices, so your class 2As and your class 2Bs. Starting with your class 2As, you've got two options. One is to go through the first option, which is Annex 9, evaluating your QMS. So in this particular case, they will evaluate your quality management system. Here, so the general principle is for class 2As and above, or for a class 1 measuring sterile and reusable and above, really your QMS can then be certified by a certification body. In this particular case, it will be the same notified body where, for example, an ISO 13485 certificate will then be issued. That is the QMS that will be evaluated by the notified body. As a rule of thumb, for a simple class 1 device, we don't advocate having, it's not to advocate, but the necessity for having a certified quality management system is not there for a simple self-certified class 1 device. You need to putting the quality management system in place according to Article 10 of the EU MDR, draw up your technical documentation, then draw up your declaration of conformity yourself. But the mandatory requirement to have a certified QMS for a simple class 1 device is not the same as a class 2A device, where class 2A devices all form the 1 sterile measuring reusable and above, you need the notified body's involvement to really certify that QMS, and that could be an ISO 13485 quality management system for medical devices. So that is the option that will then go apply for your class 2A devices. So it is your QMS coupled with your technical documentations, and there is a another administrational footnote in Annex 9 talking about the retention of records, how long you're supposed to keep records for a simple medical device. It will be keep it for 10 years. If you're an implantable device, then it's 15 years. So those are the elements that will be assessed for a class 2A device. And then your second option for a class 2A device is your technical documentation according to Annex 2 and 3. That will be assessed for 1 representative advice per your device category, and that also applies to your first option as well. But that is coupled with the processes as outlined within Annex 11, which is assessing your production methods of that particular medical device. So those are the 2 options for your class 2A device. And then we come into your class 2Bs. So these are not class 2Bs implantables. Those are under a higher risk, and I'll come to that in a bit. So for your class 2Bs medical devices, it's Annex 9, Chapter 1, the QMS, as we've already detailed, and that will also be according to 1 representative device per generic device group. So device families, you assess 1 of those per the family, as well as your technical documentation outlined in Section 4 of Annex 9. So that is your options for your medium risk devices. A class 2A, you've got 2 options, and your class 2B, you've only got just the 1 option. So really, we need to acknowledge that, you know, we do have a few options. Usually we see manufacturers not knowing about other options that are available. So if you go a class 2A device, you know, they are very familiar with probably just the first option and not option 2. So this hopefully highlights that you've got more options to use, and you really need to evaluate which option you are then going to use before you approach your notified body. For your high-risk devices, so starting with class 2B implantables, again, you've got 2 options there. And for your class 3s, you've also got 2 options also available. Option 1 under your class 2B implantable is the most common route, which is, you know, Annex 9, your QMS, and with your coupled with your technical documentation. But however, this excludes certain type of dental implantable devices as listed on the screen. And then coming into the second option, you've got Annex 10, which is your type examination. So this really focuses on the type of device that you are producing. So 1 device as an example or representative for a batch or for the production, and they would then assess the production methods that you're using for that, as well as the QMS and the technical documentations for it. So that's what Annex 10 is looking at for class 2B implantable devices. And then coming on to class 3s, again, you've got 2 options there. The very first one is your QMS and with your technical documentation, as we've already spoken about. And option 2 would then be Annex 10, which is the type examination. But however, as you can appreciate, this is a class 3 device. It falls into the highest risk of devices. That is then combined with Annex 11, which is then looking at your production processes for that particular device, making sure that you are fulfilling all requirements, and if you've got any harmonized standards, any common specifications, or any other regulations or standards that are applicable to the production methods of that particular device, in particular sterilization, and any elements of implantation that's happening within the device, or if the device is going to be implantable, then those aspects will also be evaluated as per the second option for a class 3 device. So these are the options that are available under the MDR. For your class 1 low risk devices, your class 2A and your class 2B medium devices, and your class 3, which are the class 3, which falls under the higher risk devices, and your class 2Bs, which also fall under your higher risk devices. So looking at the IVDR, again, similar to the EU MDR, we've got Article 48 for the IVDR that then talks about, which classification your device falls under and which route you need to take. Tells you the what to do, and really Annex 9 to 11 would then go into the how you need to do it and what documents you need to have in place. So similar to what we saw under the MDR for your class 1 devices, under the IVDR, you got 4 classifications, so class A to class D. And the first, or the lower side of things, for class A devices are then split into self-certified, and then again class A sterile, which would then require a limited involvement of the notified body. So that's very similar to what we've already discussed. So I won't go into too much detail for the class A's or for the various options that we've got under the IVDR. It's very similar to the EU MDR, and I'll touch on a few pointers there for the interest of time. But yeah, the slides will also be sent out to you. Please do have a read, and if you've got any questions, you can reach out to us. If you've got any questions now, we have a Q&A session. If not, you can always reach out to us after the webinar as well. Class 2Bs, really, so when it comes to the IVDs, first of all, you've got the self-testing devices, near patient testing devices, companion diagnostic devices, and then everything else. So under class 2Bs, we start with self-testing, near patient testing, and then any other device that then falls into a class 2B category. And really, as you can see, the key take here is to really know the classification that your device falls into, and that can be done according to Annex 8 of the EU MDR or the IVDR, really going through the rules that then apply, whether your device is active, invasive or non-invasive, have a look at those elements for your, that's under the EU MDR. Go through the classification routes, determine as per your intended purpose and the duration of use, to really determine the classification of your device. Then you can then go into the respective article of the regulation. So if it's the EU MDR, you then go into Article 52. If it's the IVDR, you go to Article 48, and based on the classification, then you read on the route that's then accessible to you, and then have a look at the options that are available, which one's more easier to yourself and the organization, and which one would you find easy to then compile your technical documentation or have the relevant documentation to. So that's a very key thing to do when you are assessing the classification of your device or the conformity assessment route of your device. So I did digress a little bit there. So for your class 2Bs, once you've done that for self-testing and near patient testing, again, those would tend to follow the simpler route, if I may call it so. Annex 9, your QMS, and then your technical documentation following sections 4.4 to 4.8. So these will be specific requirements within the technical documentation or the QMS to assess those by the notified body. And again, that will be one representative device per device category. Okay, and then you've got all other devices that then fall under the class B route. Again, I think the difference here is the inclusion of section 5.1 of Annex 9 when you're assessing your technical documentation, the difference between self-testing and the near patient testing. So do take note of that and then follow the requirements accordingly. So then coming into your high-risk devices, so your class Cs and then your class Ds. For your class C, so here, this is where the companion diagnostics then come into play, because, you know, they are diagnosing a medical condition and then taking certain steps in some instances. It could be injecting a particular medicine after carrying out the diagnostic check. So these then fall into a higher classification, class Cs and then class Ds. So under your class Cs, then you've got two options, option 1 and then option 2. So under your first option, really they are the type of devices that then fall into certain groups. So for example, if you are a companion diagnostic, then class of option 2 doesn't really apply. For a class C device, then it's just the first option that will be available to yourself, which is going through Annex 9, your QMS plus your technical documentation, and then the technical documentation specifications there are for sections 4.4 to 4.8, and then it adds on another 5.1 and then 5.2 as per that particular Annex 9, and that is for each and every device that is then being produced, needs to then be assessed accordingly. So you can tell the intent of the regulation here for your high-risk devices. They intend to go further into the assessments for these type of devices. And then coming into your class Ds, again, you've got two options there. Okay, so option 1 would then be, you know, what I'll call the simpler route, Annex 9, but then that excludes sections 5, and then it goes into looking at the section 3 of that particular one, which is the retention nodes that we've spoken about. And then you see the options for self-testing, near patient testing, then your diagnostics, companion diagnostics as well. Under class D, for your companion diagnostics, it's all chapters 1, 2, and 3 of Annex 9 would then be applicable. So it's not just 1 and 3, unlike the other devices. It's all chapters that would then be applicable for that particular class D IVD device. Option 2, for your class D devices, you've got Annex 10, which is the type examination I spoke about, and that's assessing the production processes that you are going through along with your QMS. Do you have the necessary processes to guard the procedures or manufacturing procedure that the device is then going through? So it's a verification, it's a product verification process. Annex 10, and then some elements of Annex 11. And as you are reading, or if you go through Annex 9 to 11 for both regulations, you will see they are interconnecting elements of it. So once you get into Annex 10 and Annex 11, it makes references to certain key areas, technical documentation areas for Annex 9. So you'll be flipping flipping between Annex 9, the 10, and 11. If you are especially a higher risk device, you start off by saying, I'm going to assess it by Annex 10 or Annex 11, but certain elements of it would then refer you to the quality management system aspects or the technical documentation aspects of Annex 9. So they're very well interconnected there. So do pay particular attention to those when you are going through the conformity assessment route. And there are other instances where an EU reference lab is required, for your devices with certain analytical performances. Those are all detailed within the annexures or Article 48 as well. So do pay particular attention to those when you are going through those. Having a look at first, do you fall into the A to D route, and then going through the various options that are available to you. Okay, so this brings us to the next section where we'll be talking about the key processes of going through a conformity assessment, and we've titled it Navigating a Conformity Assessment. At this stage, I will hand over to my lovely co-presenter, Smridula.
Thank you, Joseph. So like Joseph mentioned earlier, one of the problems that we have, or one of the challenges that we have, is selecting the notified body. There are currently only 49 notified bodies available for MDR assessment, and then for IVDR there are 12. Some of the factors that you have to keep in mind before selecting a notified body is the pricing, the duration, as in what timeline you're looking for before you want to put your device into the market and get it CE marked under MDR, till when your previous license is applicable. If it's a new device, then as soon as possible. So all of those you'll have to keep in mind while you're selecting a notified body. And the steps involved are, you'll have to put in an initial application, which gets accepted, as in you're now in the queue to have your documents reviewed by the notified body. Post this, there is a completeness check, which involves a detailed review of all of the documents. It's not a review of the data within the documents, but the documents themselves, whether they are available or not. For instance, whether you have a PSUR in place, whether you have the correct IFU in place, whether your technical file has all of its required sections available. There is a checklist that is provided by most of the notified bodies that you can have, and then verify if everything is available and submit the documents in order of the checklist so that it's easier for the reviewer to go through them. After you pass the completeness check, there is a technical review, which is a review of all of your technical documentation, including the technical file, your related SOPs, all of the testing that goes to show conformity with the ISO standards or any other standards that you're claiming conformance to. Once the technical review is completed and this has been accepted, you then move on to the clinical review, which involves the review of all of your PMS documentation, including your CER, your PMS plans, your PMCF plans. And then post that, you have either the recommendation or refusal. It's important to note that both step 4 and 5 come with 3 rounds. So they can pose questions to you, and you're given a certain timeline within which you have to answer these questions or make corrections to the document or provide additional data. In some cases, after the clinical review, there is also a clinician's review, where a practicing physician is asked to look into the data that you've provided within the CER to see if it's in line with what is currently being seen in the field or in the market. They can raise questions, but these are not considered non-conformities. They're considered requests for additional information or requests for clarity. There are no limitations to the number of rounds that this can go through. It can be multiple rounds, but it can also be grounds for refusal. So you can go through the technical review, you can go through the clinical review, and after that, if the clinician raises questions that you're not able to answer, it still can be grounds for refusal. And it's always important to keep in touch with your scheme manager during the entire process to make sure that you're submitting everything as required within the correct timelines and in the proper format.
Yeah, Yeah.
Anything?
Goody. Yes, and a key point to also add to that, steps 4 and step 5, going through your technical review and your clinical review, and Smridula also mentioned you are generally allowed 3 rounds of questioning. So, they will evaluate your documentation. If they've got questions, they will pose that to you. That will be round 1. You provide your answers to that. And, then subsequent questions, round 2 and round 3. At the same time, the notified body has got the option immediately after round 1 to refuse if they deem it that you will not have enough time to bridge the gaps that they've already seen. If you're not close to the mark, then after the initial review, that can also be refused. And that is also clearly stipulated within the contracts. So look out for all of these clauses, or read the contracts fully. Make sure you understand the wording before you sign it. If you don't understand any of the small print or the main clauses of the contract, then please reach out to your scheme manager or to the salesperson that you're dealing with at the notified body stage, and make sure you get clarification before signing. Once you sign, you are committing to a hefty cost, especially if you're in a medium to high risk classification. So I just wanted to add that point to that conversation. Smridula, thanks.
Thank you, Joseph.
Okay.
Go with the best practices.
Yep, sure. So here we'll be looking at a few best practices that you need to adopt when you are going through a conformity assessment. And number 1 that screams out all of us is, planning. It's, planning the expiry of your existing certificate, if that's applicable. If you are a new manufacturer coming into the market, you need to have a well-documented thought process of what you're going to do when you want to achieve it, who you're going to be partnering with, not just your notified bodies, but regulatory consultants like ourselves. You need to factor a lot of elements in. So do make sure that you are planning these things out properly. The classification of the device, how long it's going to take, selecting your notified body, make sure that you fulfill the most important requirements to you, the organization, whether it's time or whether it's cost. And from the notified body's point of view, make sure that you've got your documentation is well on point. So planning is key, making sure that you've got the right resources in place as well, because once the ball starts rolling, you've got very little time to address elements that come out of rounds of questioning or even during the completeness check. So make sure that you are planning things properly, effectively, with the right people, with the right partners. And don't overcommit yourself to elements that you are not ready or prepared for. So that is 1, that's planning. 2 is good communication. It's quite surprising how good communication goes quite a long way within a conformity assessment. When you conduct a conformity assessment, especially with a notified body, make sure your communication is clear and you're asking the right questions. The notified bodies are, they are human beings, and they do understand what manufacturers are going through. So do talk to them, raise concerns with them. A key thing is they do not consult, okay? But you can get answers to certain questions, and where you are overstepping the mark, the notified bodies will correct you and let you know that they do not consult, basically. So have good communication practices in place. Make sure everything is on email when you're communicating with them. Things are well written. in that particular case, and try not to waste time during your communications with the notified bodies, because some of them, in trying to get clarification in certain elements, they will still charge you for that time. So make your communication concise, brief, and very, very clear, and in all your communications to the notified body. Another thing is, where you've assessed your, or if you are addressing elements of the technical file during your rounds of questioning or during the completeness check, be open with the notified body. Let them know what's going on. Don't try to be smart about it and hide things. And they will find what they're looking for, or they will pose the question. And if you do not have the answer, then like I said, if the gap is so huge, insurmountable, then basically they will deny you the chance of going through multiple rounds. So a clear and good communication is well appreciated when you're going through this process. There are certain instances where you can provide certain test plans or plans into tests that you are conducting and contracts with other third parties that could form part and parcel of your technical documentation. It's not complete. It's not the best situation, but you need to be open with the notified body. With it, if you do find yourself between a hard place and a rock, then please do speak to your notified bodies and seek clarification on which will be the best option to you and the notified body, and they will be able to advise you as such, or the reviewer that you're working with will be able to advise you as such. The last one that we would like to touch on here is the quality of your documentation, technical documentation, including your clinical documentation that you've got on file. Where things need to be provided in a PDF format, and some of the notified bodies do request for it in a PDF format, and it must have a clear table of contents and must be clearly bookmarked. It makes the review process even easier, or much easier. If you do not give your reviewer stress in going through your documents, then there is the assurance that it's going to be a smooth and easy process for both parties involved. If you stress out the reviewer by giving them poor quality, then you're going to end up with a long list of questions to seeking clarifications or requesting for documents. You don't want to be in that particular position, because you will not be utilizing your rounds of questions effectively, and by the time you know it, you've run out of questions, and you won't be recommended a certificate in that particular case. One last bit is, when you are putting your technical documentation together, do not be afraid to use images, tables, figures. These things provide more clarity within your technical documentation. When it comes to clinical evidence and clinical data, make sure you are providing valid sources for your clinical data. Clinical data is very key when you're going through your conformity assessment. Either you are proving the intended purpose or the indication for use, or the population that you're going to be using the device with, or the endpoints that you've drawn up. All of these aspects will be evaluated and vetted by the notified body. So do make sure you go through these properly. Smridula, I don't know if you've got anything to add on this.
Yeah, just one thing from all of the communications that we've had with the clinical reviewers. One thing to keep in mind is they are not as familiar with your product as you are. So providing detailed explanations where possible is always welcomed. They're not going to consider it redundant or unnecessary information. So wherever you're putting in information explaining how your product works, explaining what the risks are, or explaining why you're considering a particular thing a benefit, or what your thought process is, that's always welcomed because it helps them align with where you're coming from. The second thing is they do not like being pointed to multiple sections. So even though you've written something in section 1 and you're talking about it again in section 7 or section 8 or whatever it is, rewrite it. It's okay if it's redundant, because at the end of the day, they don't want to be jumping across the document multiple times to see where the information is. It's okay if it's a little redundant, especially details related to your risk or details related to the adverse events that you found. Discuss it in multiple places wherever it's relevant. It's okay if it's a little redundant. It just helps them organize everything instead of having to shift through multiple documents and shift through multiple sections and check all of the cross-linking. It's easier for them to have all of the data organized. And most of the clinical reviewers don't have access to all of the data that's submitted to them. They have access to the PMS documentation and the CP, the CR, the risk files. So cross-referencing the technical file and then not giving any information about the test that was conducted, or not giving a summary of the test that was conducted, that's not helpful to them. They won't be able to access the technical file. So summarizing that or adding a little bit, a couple of sentences which allows them to understand what the test was is always encouraged. We should keep in mind that the CER, the CP, everything is a standalone document. It's not reviewed or analyzed as a part of the technical file.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for adding those points on, Smridula. The next section will go into pitfalls and challenges, and then hopefully we'll have some time left, and we can go into our Q&A session. Okay, challenges and pitfalls. I think so far, because we are quite privileged to have the opportunity to work with various notified bodies and across different classes of medical devices or IVDs, with numerous medical device manufacturers. And to say incomplete technical documentation, it's very, very important. And this is why the notified bodies have the completeness check process in place, to make sure that at least you know what your document is called, or you can reference it at least. The completeness check doesn't form part of the in-depth conformity assessment per se. It's to give the notified body a sniff at it, or a sense of what your documentation is like, or what you've got in place. Make sure your technical documentation is full. Follow the requirements of Annex 1, 2, and 3, coupled with Article 10 for your QMS. Make sure your QMS is addressing all MDR elements. If you are moving from the directive era into the regulation side of things, make sure you've updated your QMS accordingly, to make sure that all the elements as per the MDR or IVDR have been reflected within your QMS, and your technical documentation is complete, especially when it comes to clinical data. Okay, the second one will be the cost. Unfortunately, going through a conformity assessment, depending on the classification of your device, how your device is being used, who is going to be used for, the complexities involved, the cost does add up, and unfortunately, there's not much we can do about it. The cost is what it is, but what you, the manufacturer, can do to minimize costs is to make sure that you are partnered with the right people, you got the right resources in place, your communication is clear, your documentation is well on point. Then you will incur less time going through the conformity assessment or the reviews of the conformity assessment. And because the notified bodies allocate a number of hours per review cycle, per device, per family pet technical documentation. So the better you plan your technical documentation, or the good quality technical documentation you provide, well, it all ends up in the bottom line as well. Your cost will be significantly less. It's still relatively expensive, but make sure you put all of these things in place, which will then minimize the cost. If you're doing your vetting, make sure you do compare notified bodies and really what's the best option to you in terms of timelines, how much it's going to cost, and the quality that you have in terms of your technical documentation resources, and as well as the notified bodies side of things. We've already touched on communication, so make sure your communication is clear and precise. Also, what we've seen, and it might just be a coincidence where we find ourselves in towards the end of May 2024, and we all know the extension requirements that were put in place in March 2023. Like I said, it might just be a coincidence that we find ourselves at this last end. And I came across an article published by a notified body indicating a reduction in application rates, both the MDR and the IVDR. And personally, I think it's just a coincidence that the time of the year where we are, Q4 2023 coming into early this year, it coincides with the extension requirements that are in place. You must put your application in by May 2024. If not, you do miss your mark. So the exponential rates of applications have gone down, but that might just be a coincidence. Just stay on top of things. Do not treat the extension as time for you to rest, which is what we can also look at, deduce from these reduction in exponential rates. Do not rest on your laurels, and make sure you are still persevering with the process and getting into your conformity assessment. Smridula, do you want to touch on the others?
Yes. So timelines and submitting your documents either initially or during the question rounds after you've received the non-conformity is one of the challenges that we all face. You have 30 days after the non-conformity has been raised to submit your responses, as well as any updated documentation that goes along with it. And it does seem really short, but depending on the type of non-conformities that are raised, it can be reached. Usually, if there's very big gaps, like Joseph mentioned, they will provide you the option to ask for an extension. And that extension can go up to an additional 60 days. So you'll have a total of 90 days to address all of the comments. But in our experience, the more you push it out, the harder it becomes, especially if the non-conformities are not that significant, if it does not involve conducting testing or making any significant updates. You should try and get it done within the 30 days. One, because the documents remain fresh within the mind of the reviewer. So they're able to pick up where they left off, and they're able to go through just the sections that have been updated and provide a more rapid response, and the turnaround time is better. However, if additional time is required, if the gaps are a little significant and you do have to do some kind of testing or develop new documentation that was not previously submitted or that you do not have on hand, then it's fine to ask for an extension. But make sure that the request for the extension does not come at the last minute. Give the reviewers a little time to consider your request for extension, provide a justification for why the extension is required. And then you'll be able to complete all of the documentation as needed. As I mentioned in the last slide, apart from the clinical review, there's also a clinician review. And one thing to keep in mind during the clinician review is they're not fully trained on the MDR requirements. So they are using a checklist, or they are going through the document in a way that they have to see if it checks every box that's that's listed in the MDR. So if you think something is implied, you've written a statement and you think this implies that it is conformant to this particular requirement of the MDR, that's not going to stick with them. It's better to call it out. It's better to say, we're following 61.3 route of conformity. This is the reason. This is the explanation. Adding in more details will help them understand your thought process, especially during the clinician review. That also goes for your thought process when you're determining the state of the art, or you're calling out the risks, or you're saying some risk is not relevant. Always provide as much explanation as possible. And before submitting any of your documentation, make sure that whatever your route you're selecting for your clinical documentation is appropriate to the device. For instance, if you think it's a legacy product or a well-established technology, make sure that it is actually a well-established technology. Make sure that it is a legacy product before choosing the pathway that is applicable to these products. Make sure it's documented within the report what type of route you're following and why.
Okay, thank you very much, Smridula. We'll hand back to Owen here. And I think this brings us to the end of the the main slides of it. Probably we can use 30 seconds or so to go through any questions that we may have. Owen, not sure if you've got any questions there.
Yes, we've got a few. Obviously, we're approaching time now, so if you're able to stay with us, that'd be great. If not, any of these questions which we answer now will be on the recording, which we'll send in the next few days. And if we don't get around to your questions, we will reach out to you individually. So if you do have any questions, please do drop them in the Q&A now. But just to get started, so we've got, how would the retention period change with the implementation in the future of the liability directive?
The liability directive and retention periods. The retention periods basically apply to everything, applies to all documents of the tech file. So it will not have any impact on liability per se. I mean, you can argue that because of the liability clauses within the MDR is the reason why they've probably increased the timelines that we see there. So it's 10 years for all medical devices and 15 years if it's an implantable device. I'm sure, and one key thing is you have to make records available from the last point or since the last device was placed on the market of that particular batch. So you could place your device now and stop producing the device, but then you must keep records for the next 10 years or 15 years if you're an implantable device. So if there's any liability or any legal litigations that are meant to come up, then within that 10-15 year period, all these documents should be available. So it doesn't necessarily correlate or have an impact on it, but 10 years is 10 years and 15 years is 15.
Thank you. And then we've got, which option is appropriate for a class 1 device that is sterile but not measuring or reusable surgical instrument?
Yeah.
In other words, if the device is only sterile, would it qualify for self-certification?
It's self-certification, but you do need the notified body's involvement on the sterility element of or the sterile side of things. So you can't just straight away self-certify, produce your DOC, and that's it. No, you need to get in touch with the notified body, and they will. It's limited. They will only look at the sterile functions of the device, i.e., are you conducting a sterilization yourself? What method of sterilization you're using? Are you using the right methods? Your partners that you're using for sterilization, are they certified? What your QMS processes are talking about when it comes to sterilization, so on and so forth. Worst case scenario, they'll pay a visit to your subcontractors who are conducting sterilization and to evaluate their QMS and other documents.
Joseph, and I think we've probably got time for one more. So would having 2 notified bodies for CE certification necessarily mean having audits from both for ISO 13485?
Yeah, this is a very it's a good question. It's a bad question in other sense. You cannot have two notified bodies or have contracts with two notified bodies. That is a no-no. And the notified bodies do have a clause within the contract, and it's stipulated in the EU MDR as well. If a manufacturer is refused a C certificate, or even after you sign a contract and you withdraw from the contract, the notified body is still supposed to make known to the European Commission the details that you guys have discussed, and submit the manufacturer name and an address and the reason for refusal or withdrawal of that particular contract. So if you then put in a second application with another notified body, the questions are there. Have you already applied with another notified body? And these things will then come up. The notified bodies do have a way to check and verify the information that you are providing. So it's not advisable to be using two notified bodies, if I understand the question correctly. It's not possible. You only have to use just one notified body at a time.
Sorry, Joseph. I believe the question was for two different products, as in it's not the same product, but it's two different products from the same manufacturer.
Right.
Different.
Yes. Okay. Sorry. Yeah, I get that. Then there's nothing stopping you from doing that. Each product can go through each notified body. You'll be using the same QMS. You'll be using the same documentation for both notified bodies. But yeah, you can use the same same documentation, same QMS, but two different notified bodies, and each one has their list of devices that they're using. So yeah, thanks for the correction there, Smridula.
Okay, I think we're just about at time there. So thank you both very much for the presentation. That was very informative. Thank you all for your questions. If we do have questions we haven't got to, so we will come back to you individually post-session. And like I mentioned earlier, the recording will be sent out to all registrants in the next few days. So thanks again, and we hope to see you next time.
Okay. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a good day.